Okay.
All right.
Hi guys, welcome to Axxess. For those of you who don't know what we do, we're a technology company who just happens to be healthcare for now. So we're focused on home healthcare software, everything people do from scheduling to billing to point of care. We have a lot of different apps within that space. We're always looking for engineers. I am I'm on the mobile team. So we have lots of open positions. It's just really open space, lots of fun things to do. If y'all want tours, let me or one of the people in the Axxess shirts know. And we also have our recruiting team back there. So if anyone's interested, if you're checking out my website on your phone, you can just go talk to them. I hope you guys are. And we're just so happy to have Laravel here with us. This is not our first, I know it's not, the first time we've hosted you guys, so we're really excited to have you back. Dave's, one of our senior engineers, and we're so glad he introduced us through Laravel, and we want to have more participation from our engineering team as well. We're actually doing a code push now, so a lot of us are going to start coming in, and as I say that, they're actually just starting to walk in. This is perfect timing. But we're just, like I said, we're just very excited, and we're super excited about today's speaker as well. Jon, welcome. Welcome here. Welcome to Texas. I don't know if this is your first time, but welcome to Texas. Welcome to Dallas. We're so glad to have you.
All right, cool. Thank you so much for the introduction. So, welcome to Laravel DFW. For those of you that haven't come before, I've met a few people, Miguel and others. So, excited for the Axxess team. Shipping is good. Can we give them a round of applause for shipping code? So, we're very excited today to have Jon Behr with us from London, originally from South Africa, but he hails from London now. And so I'll go through a couple things, and then I'll introduce him. He's going to give us a great talk today on repositories and interfaces and how those can make your life happier. And your marriage, possibly, but mainly your life in coding. So my name is Tanner Hearn. I'm the organizer of Laravel DFW. Lots of help for co-organizers with Seth and Nathan. Nathan's not here tonight, but there's my information. Ask me any questions you want if you have questions. We can just say thanks to Axxess. Let's give another round of applause. If you're watching online, if you're on your computer in your bedroom, you can give them a round of applause too. I'll hear it. We just welcome to it. If you want, we have a Slack channel. If you go to laraveldfw.com/Slack, then just put in your email address and we'll send you an invite. It's really great because no matter what time of day, you can jump on there, ask a question, and you'll have a group of people that are in this area that can answer you. And we have a lot of good conversations about bugs people are having or questions they have about proper development skills or processes. And it's just a really good spot in case you need somebody that you know to ask a question rather than going on Stack Overflow or posting into Twitter and hoping that someone responds. So additionally, if you have any questions tonight about anything that Jon is covering or really anything in Laravel that you just want to ask, just mention us on Twitter at Laravel DFW. We'll go through them at the end and ask Jon a few questions if he's willing to answer them. Jon, are you willing? Willing and ready? Good thumbs up. So he'll answer any questions you have, and we'll go from there. So without further ado, let me introduce Jon. So Jon is from London. He runs a shop called Mettle. They do a lot of great work. They have a few products of their own. a good Laravel one you're interested in is understand.io, which it basically captures all of your logs. He can say more about that. Take as much time as you want to sell your product there. But so he also runs Laravel London, and so they have, I think, I don't know, 50 up to 75 or 100 members that come regularly, and so we're excited to have him. So John.
Hey everyone, first time in Texas, first time in Dallas, but I have been to the States before, and never this far, never on this side, but awesome to be here. Thanks for having me. Thanks Tanner for inviting me. Axxess for hosting. As Tanner mentioned, actually Tanner, can you get my presentation?
Just put, it's on.
Okay, cool. As Tanner mentioned, I actually run the London Laravel meetup, which is, I think, the largest meetup in the world. We have over 500 registered artisans, and regularly our meetups are oversubscribed, around about 50 to 75 people, depending on where we're hosting it. And actually, it's kind of a funny story, but there's a thing going around on Twitter at the moment about first 7 jobs. I don't know if you guys have seen that. And it's the first time I've thought about it in a long time. And see, my first 7 had absolutely nothing to do with programming or development or anything at all. And through a career change and a change in personal circumstances, I thought this web development thing can't be that tough. And it was about that time when I started losing my hair. So I've been involved in web dev for probably full-time about 6 or 7 years now. And I created a company called Mettle, and we started off on our own software as a service type products. And the first one that we did was accountsportal.com, which is online accounting, kind of like FreshBooks or QuickBooks Online, something along those lines, tailored specifically for the UK marketplace. We have a CRM type product called Center CRM, again catered specifically for accountants in the UK. And then, as Tanner mentioned, one of our more Laravel specific products is understand.io. So if you log in any data, sometimes I'll say data, that's how we say it. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, we say root and not route. So I apologize in advance. So understand.io basically is a way to capture the logs in your application, or the exceptions or the errors. And it stores it in a central location, makes it super easy for you to have a look what's happening to your log files rather than SSHing into your server. It can track any anomalies that come up in your log data. So if you've just pushed a new release, for example, and all of a sudden your app starts throwing a specific error, then understand.io will alert you to that. It will give you some nice trends so you can see what's happening to your errors over time, quickly going down. So if you haven't had a look at it, please, by all means, go and have a peek. We also have a consulting side to our business, which is kind of how I got here, because I work a lot with Tanner and all the guys and girls at Music Behr. We do specifically Laravel consulting, and then we're quite familiar with Elasticsearch as well. And actually, that's what understand.io is built on, Laravel and Elasticsearch. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about repositories and interfaces. And it really comes down to philosophy about coding and how to, some ideas about how to structure your code to make your applications perhaps a little bit more maintainable, flexible, easier to scale, testable, all these kind of terms that you'll probably hear throughout development. And I'll start off with an example controller. And if you're writing a small app that's maybe got 5 pages or something along those lines, then this kind of methodology is totally fine, and I would probably advocate you following this kind of thing. I haven't put any brackets or anything in any of my functions or methods, just for brevity. But let's take, for example, we've got a contacts controller in your app, and you've got an all method, which you're hoping to basically show a listing of all your contacts. And in that case, you just call Eloquent directly, and you just do contacts all, and you'll return that in your view. And if you look at the Laravel documentation, that's the kind of methodology which they follow. There's a couple of problems with this as your app scales and starts to get more complicated and bigger. First of all, because it's very tightly coupled to Eloquent. And if at some point in time you want to use a different database or a different store, it becomes tedious to go throughout the code and find all those Eloquent methods which you've been looking for. It's a little bit more difficult to test, and I'll come back to that a little bit later in the talk. Dry is something which I place a lot of emphasis on in my code. Do not repeat yourself. So if you've got some other view somewhere else in your application where you want to show contact, or you've got an API, you're going to be using the exact same Eloquent method. And then at some point down the line you want to change something, it means you've got to go to a final place throughout the code. And just finding bugs, again, do not repeat yourself. It happens if you get a bug in one place, chances are it's going to pop up somewhere else as well. So we introduced this concept of repositories. And really what a repository is a service layer between your database and your application. So if you're using Eloquent directly, it means there's no interface or layer in between Eloquent and your application. And by your application, I mean your controller. There's a concept which some people will say, well, you know, if you want to change your database from MySQL to Postgres, or you want to go to a NoSQL store or Elasticsearch, using repositories makes it a bit easier. And that's probably a good argument, but I'd say the likelihood of you changing your database is very, very slim. And you've got a lot more other things to worry about than something like this in your code. One of the things which I like the most about it is that it really avoids you repeating yourself in your code. And it makes everything so much cleaner, more easier to understand. You follow a convention, so if you're working in a team of developers, if you all follow the same convention, you know exactly how things are going to fit together. So here's an example of a repository. We just call it a contact repository in this case. And we create, I've just shown two simple functions here. The one is all, and in the first case, we're just returning contact all. And then we've got another method called find, and we pass in an ID for the contact. And we just do a find, or you could do a find or fail from Eloquent. And if we use that concept in our contacts controller, instead of calling Eloquent directly, we've still got our method all. But in this case, what we're going to do is actually instantiate this class called contact repository. And from that repository, we're going to call the all method. And that will, behind the scenes, automatically call Eloquent, return our code, and then we can return that to the view. There's still some problems though, in that in this case we're tied to a specific repository. We're using this word new inside our controller, and that's probably not a good idea. Really what you should be aiming for in development with more complicated apps or as your apps grow is to avoid using the word new as much as possible. That's probably what I call a code smell if I'm inheriting some project and I have a look at what's been done before. If I see a lot of new model, new repository, new service, whatever it is, it would probably start ringing some alarm bells for me. And I'll show you why as we go through this. You may have heard of dependency injection, and there's a few technical terms which I'll read off. It's a design pattern that implements inversion of control and allows a program, blah, 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 blah. Rubbish. Basically what we're saying is instead of using the keyword, the PHP keyword of new in your controllers or your services or anything like that, we inject it into the constructor of that class. So public function __ construct. And what that does is, first of all, it takes away using the word new anywhere, because you put it into your constructor and then pass it in as an object to your class. And it makes your code much more loosely coupled, much more flexible, easier to swap out implementation. So if you want to change something at a later date, you don't have to go throughout your code and look for where have I instantiated my contact repository. If you've got many controllers that are using that repository, you have to go through all of those controllers to do a find and replace. If you're using dependency injection and you want to change the way that it's handled, you only have to go to one place. And I'll show you guys how that works. Before I get there, I want to talk through this concept of interfaces. And what an interface really is, it's teaching you a different mindset when you code about coding towards what something does rather than how it does it. So if you think, some people use the term a contract. Basically what an interface is, a contract about how your application works and what methods there are available in that contract. But it doesn't tell you how that's implemented at all. And that's actually quite, it sounds counterintuitive, but it's actually really powerful. Because you know that if you ever instantiate something that's based on an interface, it is definitely has to have all those methods listed. It's contractually bound to that interface. If any of those methods are missing, or if they have a different signature, anything like that, you got that your program will throw an error straight away and say, you know, that's not allowed. So just putting it another way, what an interface does is represents what a class can do, but not how it's actually done. So here's an interface. We've been talking about contacts. And if you create an interface called contact interface, all you need to define in there is your method names and the signatures for those methods. So here I've just put three simple ones. We've got an all method, we've got a find method, and we've got a store method. So if you use Laravel's RESTful conventions, this would kind of fit into 3 of those 7 methods. And then what we do with that interface is we then base our contact repository. If you remember earlier, we created a repository for contacts. And we say that that repository must implement the contact interface. So we've got our interface, which represents the contract. It specifies what something looks like. And here we've now got a repository which actually tells us, where you specify how it's going to work. How are those methods actually going to get their data? I haven't written it all out yet, but as we did for our interface, if you go back, you can see we've got our 3 methods, all find and store. And in my repository, I would have to have those same 3 methods with exactly the same parameters passed in. And you could then specify how that code, how that is actually executed. So coming back to what we spoke about earlier, we put all the pieces back together now in dependency injection. So how do we actually achieve dependency injection in a Laravel application? It's become a lot easier in Laravel 5. In Laravel 4, the concept was kind of there, but it wasn't as clear and clean cut. And in Laravel 3, it was almost non-existent. But if we go back to our context controller, you can see here all we need to do is in the constructor, we need to pass in a type int of contact interface. And we then store that variable called contacts in the class. You can see there's a protected variable called $contact. And I guess your next question is, well, how does Laravel, how does the framework actually know what you're talking about? How does it know what a contact interface is? And how does it know when you pass in the contact interface's dependency injection, how does it know to get the contact repository and use that? Well, all you have to do in Laravel, if you look, there's service providers, all you have to do is bind your repository to the interface. Literally like that. You go into the register method and you bind it. Now you'll recall earlier I spoke about if you want to change something in your code and you no longer want the contact interface to be bound to the contact repository. If you weren't using dependency injection, you have to go through all your code, looking for all the different calls, change all of them to some different repository that you want to use, hopefully find them all, but probably not, miss out a few. If you've bound it using dependency injection like this, you go to one place, and you can change it from using contact interface to tenant contact interface, or something else that you define. And that would then flow right throughout your app, and everything would be automatically updated. Because you've got your interface, and because your repository is bound to that interface, it means your application has followed that contract already. It has to have, because it would be throwing errors. And because you've followed that contract, everything else should work correctly, as long as you've implemented your methods correctly. And that really helps a lot in terms of making your application more flexible and really more maintainable. So this is a better idea than we had before. We've got our contacts controller again. You can see there we inject our contact interface into the constructor. And now if you look at our index method, whereas previously we were doing new contact repository, we don't need that anymore because our contact repository is actually bound as a class variable to $contact. And if you use your IDE, that will type in all of this for you. And when you go to contacts in our index function, this contacts will give you a list of all the methods that are available in your interface. It'll give you all doc blocks, and you'll know exactly which methods are and are not available. You'll know exactly which parameters you can pass into that method. And that alone will save you untold hours of maintainability and flexibility. Just doing that, if I'm picking up a new project and I see somebody has implemented repositories and interfaces, I'm 80% comfortable working with that project. Just that one thing on its own. Like, if anybody ever comes to me and says, I'm struggling to maintain this, everybody's doing their own thing, making changes is really difficult, this is the one piece of advice I can give on the project. And it's actually really simple. It takes a bit more time to set up each time because you have to create a repository and an interface, and you have to bind it. So it takes maybe 10 minutes more, 15 minutes more each time, but it will save you untold hours into the future. So we can take it a bit further, and if we're doing a normal CRUD app, and you're doing RESTful routes, you'll want to create a whole bunch of methods to deal with all of those RESTful actions that you could do. So here's a fully fleshed out contact interface. We've got an all method, we've got a paginate method, we've got find by, so if you want to find by something other than your ID field. We've got a store method, so that's to create a new method. We've got an update, an existing record, and then we've got a delete method, which basically covers 90% of your requirements in most of your apps. And then let's say we've got a post model. So we've got a post interface. I'll repeat all the same methods again. And we've got a user model. We've got a user interface, and I'll repeat all the same methods again. And then I'll ask myself, well, why are we repeating? Why are we making the same contract again and again and again for every single model that we've got in the app? Again, it comes back to do not repeat yourself. Whenever I'm programming, I'm always looking to refactor, to make things one single point of entry. So I don't repeat, basically. So what you can do, which is a better idea, is to create a base interface. And that has all the methods, your base methods that you would expect. And all you need to do then is just have your other interfaces extend that base interface. And they will automatically inherit all of those methods. So, just by having your base interface, you define, I would suggest these 7 or 8 methods. Maybe you'll have some more that you have in your app. Create other interfaces, and they can just extend their base interface. They automatically inherit all those methods. You use your IDE, and it will type in them all for you automatically. If you have some custom methods that your contact interface has that you don't want in your other ones, that's fine. Just add them that single method into your contact interface. You don't have to add the other 8 methods. They're already there because you extended your base interface. And then we can extend it even further. Just like we had a base interface, we can create a base repository. If you're looking for contacts all, or you're looking for posts all, or you're looking for users all, chances are it's going to be the exact same implementation in all of those. Create a base repository. All you need to do is pass in your model name. So there's a protected $model name. So if you're looking at, for example, your contacts repository, you would pass in your Eloquent model name there. So app contacts, or however you namespace it. And then over here, we define our individual methods, all, find, store, update. There may be, I've only shown 2 just for space. You'll see there's a method there that I'm calling this get new instance. And I'll show you what that looks like. In your base repository, you're going to resolve your model name because you defined it as a class variable. So your model name was app contacts. And all you do is return a new model. So in your base repository, if I go back one slide, for example, if I'm looking at public function all, I get my instance. In this case, it's this get new instance, which is actually underneath the hood, just do new contact, app contact for your Eloquent model. And on that instance, I'm returning all. And then, once you've fully fleshed out all your methods in your base repository, you can go to your contact repository, delete everything from it, and just say contact repository extends base repository. And that's it. It means you've got full repositories and interfaces for everything just by using a base interface and a base repository. And your contact repository, your user repository, your post repository will be completely empty. The only thing you'll need to specify is a model name, and that's it. Nothing else. All the logic is contained in your base repository. To the extent that you need a special method in your contacts, you'll define that only in your contact interface, and then you'll implement that method in your contact repository. So you'd have one method, and that's it. To the extent you need more custom functionality, just continue extending in those individual interfaces and repositories. So your base interface and your base repository, you don't really touch. Once that's set up and you're happy with the functionality, how you're getting records or storing or updating or whatever, set it to one side and forget about it. And controllers will love you for that. Your controllers will be so clean. So there's probably some questions like, well, how do I do eager loading? I want to eager load something with my contacts or with my users. How do I do that? So, for example, if we look at our find method, previously I just was passing in the ID. But if I go into my base repository, I can pass in a second parameter called $relations. And that's that's defaulted to an empty array. So by default, I don't need to pass that variable in. So if I'm looking just for a single contact, I just pass in ID 10 or whatever it may be. But I want to eager load something with those contacts so that my app doesn't have to worry about lazy loading or anything. And then I can just pass that into the array to the method. If nothing gets passed in, that's fine. Eloquent won't mind at all. So I'll return my instance with relations. No problem at all with passing in an empty array there. And then it'll find the ID. So if I'm eager loading something with my contacts, maybe they've got multiple addresses. I can just pass in the addresses relationship that I've defined in my contact model. And it will automatically eager load through my repository. Same thing with show. So if I want to look at, this is in the controller. As an example, so if we've got, let's say each contact can have multiple orders. So in this case, I'm passing in my relationship, which is called orders. And the repository will automatically pass that through to Eloquent or eager load the relationship and offload automatically back to your controller. So the last item which I want to talk about is something called multitenancy, and I'm not sure, show of hands, who knows what that means? No? So multitenancy is a concept if you've got a software as a service application, and you've got people who sign up to your service. If you use Laravel Forge or Envoy or anything like that, those are all multitenancy. So when you sign up as a user, you get a unique user ID, And then that user ID is basically a foreign key in some other models within that application. So with Envoyer, for example, you can create a project. You all know what Envoyer is. It's Laravel's automatic deployment tool, right? So you can create a project in Envoyer, and that allows you to deploy it to one of your servers. And that project is then tied to you as a user, so you're basically the owner of that project. And the way that would look like in the database is there's probably a projects table, and there would be a user ID column, and that user ID is a foreign key to the users table. So that's basically, in a nutshell, what multi-tenancy is, in that the projects can be multi-tenanted, and there can be multiple users within the projects table. The awesome thing about using the base repository and base interface type thing is that if one of your models is tied to a specific user, you want to make sure that no other users could ever possibly get access to that model. So if you make a typo somewhere in your application and somebody gets access to somebody else's project, that would be like the worst thing ever. If you use a base repository, you can take away most of that headache and never have to worry about it at all. All you need to do is create, instead of a base repository, you create another one called a base tenant repository. And you would have two variables in that, class variables. You would have a tenant key, and you would have a tenant ID. And the tenant key is basically the name of your foreign key in that model. So if we're looking at projects, it would be user ID. And then, using this multi-tenancy get new instance, if you remember before, we didn't have a where clause, all we did was return the new model. With our multi-tenancy, we automatically resolve the tenant key and the tenant ID. The tenant ID would just be the user ID, so whichever user is currently logged into the application. And then, when you use a find method, or a store method, or a all method, it's automatically filtered by using this where clause. It's impossible for somebody to get access to the wrong model, unless you've made a mistake somewhere else. But this really makes things a lot more robust and secure. And that brings me to the end. So if you've got any questions or comments, or feel free.
Anyone? If you can just repeat the question, if anybody else.
Are there situations, you mentioned the 90% in your base repository?
Yep.
With the methods.
Yep.
That you have there, about 10 methods could basically cover both situations. Is there situations in your experience, and how do you handle it, where there are quite a few other queries that you need, and they get quite complicated with joins and things? Do you stick to that repository and just put everything there, or do you ever end up creating another class? And
Okay, so the question was, I mentioned earlier that there's maybe 9 or 10 basic methods that you need in your base repository. And what would happen if you had something that required a lot more logic with a lot more methods? For consistency, if it's something that deals with the contact repository and it has database interaction, I'd want to see it in the contact repository. If there's other logic outside of DB access, database access, I might create some kind of service, a contact service that does something else, and then inject the repository into that service, do some additional logic in the service, then you get the DB and then pass it through to the controller. But for consistency, I like, if it's something to do with context, just bring the contact repository, because then somebody else will know exactly where, somebody else on the team will know exactly where it is. So, yeah.
Could you not then override the method, saying that you've got your base repository, then you could effectively override that method in your child repository while still
100%. Yeah. So the question was, if you have your base repository, but you want to implement it slightly different in your contact repository, then you would just override it in your contact repository, because your contact repository extends the base repository. That's perfectly normal and to be expected. Yeah.
Cool. Any questions? Anything from Twitter yet?
Awesome. Thank you very much, everyone.
One thing. So while he's up here, does anybody have any general Laravel questions that you'd like to pose? Anything you've come across in your travels or any projects right now that you just want to talk about?
Doing a lot of this makes testing a lot easier. What testing tools do you use, and how do you use them?
Yep. So before Laravel, I used Codeception. Do you know Codeception? Heard of it? Yeah. So it's a PHP testing framework that allows you to do functional or integration tests quite nicely. You can't do, unless you use the Selenium plugin, you can't do anything that interacts with JavaScript. But it makes simulating a post or a get method and just seeing that you get a valid response back really easy. And really, I think it was in Laravel 5, Jeff Way basically took all the concepts from Codeception and put it directly into Laravel. So there's a lot of literature out there on testing and PHP unit. And even for me, getting started in PHP unit was really tricky. I'm like, what do I test? How do I even get started? And what I would really recommend is just do the integration testing as per the Laravel docs. And by that I mean, in your test, simulate hitting your get route or your all method or whatever you want to call it, and that you actually just get a response back from it. Because that behind the scenes is actually testing, you know, the whole part of your application, that the route exists, that there's a method called index, that it's hitting eloquent, and that it's returning JSON or whatever you expect for your API, or perhaps you're returning a view and your view says, hey, this is my awesome contacts view. So if you're just getting started, I'd really recommend that. The downside is your tests will run a bit slower. The upside is it's super easy to get started. It's pretty robust and it's very comprehensive because you're touching so many things at the same time. And then what's awesome is you can refactor it in time and hopefully your test continues to work. So that's really what I'd recommend. Okay.
Any others? All right.
Cool.
All right, well, thank you, John. We can give him a hand. So thank you all for coming out. We'll just hang out for a little bit here until Axxess kicks out. Just kidding. But we'll hang out and talk for a little bit. For those of you watching online right now, or if you're watching in the future, hopefully Laravel is still relevant, but it probably won't be. So thank you for coming out tonight and for watching online. If you have any questions, just tweet at LaravelDFW on Twitter. And again, you can join the Slack channel, laraveldfw.com/Slack. Put in your email address and we'll send you an invite. You can also find out more about the meetups, laraveldfw.com. We have a couple of things cooking that are not being announced yet, but we're pretty excited about them. So we'll be talking about that. There's a couple of ways that we want to get you guys involved in some pretty cool stuff. Not just like, oh, let's get involved in the organization of Laravel DFW. Anyways, I'm pretty excited about it. So we'll probably share it in the next month or two. So yeah, thank you guys. Thank you, Axxess, again. Thank you for hosting us. It's always a good time. We'll see you next time.